Oh man, it's been a while since I've made a bear video. Guardian Druid has always been referred to as a starter tank, but that hasn't stopped players from attempting to push as high as they can in regards to the IO leaderboards. Up until Dragonflight, I was one of those players trying to make my favorite class work. While typically perceived as the weakest tank in the community, especially due to sites like Subcreation, what's so special about this tank? What strengths does it have? In this video, we're going to break down the mitigation profile of the Guardian Druid in hopes to teach both tank players and non-tank players alike how to minimize the danger when playing with this intimidating beast. Let's dive in. Quick disclaimer here. This class has seen multiple reworks over the last few months. It was one of the first classes worked on during the creation of Dragonflight, and we can assume that the premise of the new class trees all stemmed from the Druid tree. While many adaptations and positive changes have resulted from this for other classes, Guardian Druids were left in the dark for a long time. Recently, with the 10.0.5 patch, they saw a pretty massive rework, though it didn't necessarily fix the class. I'm not sure how long Guardian Druid will stay in its current state, but just keep that in mind that I'm going to be referencing the 10.0.5 Guardian Druid in this video. Unlike every other tank, Guardian Druids have a stackable form of mitigation through Ironfur. Each stack of Ironfur grants the bear additional armor based on their agility, hence why the main stat will always be king in most scenarios. Due to this, Guardian Druids have theoretically the highest potential armor value while in combat. This suits them quite well since they cannot block nor parry attacks. I should mention that Ironfur does cost rage, but with certain talents like Blood Frenzy, rage gain is rarely an issue. Guardian Druids heavily rely on dodging attacks, absorbing blows through their high armor, and then defensives with a little bit of self-healing. Ironfur is the first line of defense against physical attacks. You can see from this log here as an example that over 60% of the damage that a Guardian Druid took during this key was from melee hits. In single target situations, it's common for bears to only be able to maintain a stack or two of Ironfur, but with more targets, the stacks can go upwards of 8, granting the bear almost armor cap, which is 85% physical damage reduction. The ability to maintain high stacks of Ironfur comes strictly down to Regeneration. This isn't something Guardian Druids nor their party needs to really worry about too much unless you're hitting rage cap constantly. Since Ironfur is off the global cooldown and maintaining the buff is almost mandatory while tanking, it's important for the player to constantly be dumping their rage for Ironfur stacks. There are other ways to dump rage, but due to the importance of Ironfur Uptime and other talents that allow rage spenders to proc for free, there isn't much of a reason to hit anything else but Ironfur. While Guardian Druids mitigate a ton of damage up front, some damage will still find its way through, especially magical damage. Frenzied Regeneration is the staple ability of the Guardian Druid that heals them for a flat 32% of their current HP. Ideally, for optimal healing, the Guardian Druid would use this ability when they are below 70% health to get the full value, though the ability is a little bit more nuanced than that. Because it acts as a short heal over time effect, some bears may use this to counter incoming large fluctuations of damage. Now, there are a ton of different options in this talent tree, and while some are more popular than others, Guardian Druids can gain some healing effects from different talents. Notably, Ursoc's Fury grants absorption shields on both Maul and Thrash hits. Another common choice is After the Wildfire, which bursts AoE healing on both the Guardian Druid and nearby allies after the Guardian Druid spends 200 rage. While this sounds like a lot, it doesn't take much time to gain and spend that much rage, especially in a key environment, and this will typically make up a lot of the Guardian Druid's overall healing. There are some other options as well in the tree, like a Loon's Favored, which causes all arcane damage to heal the bear for 30% of damage dealt, but this type of build has been dropped by a lot of the top-end key pushers. For minor damage reduction cooldowns, we have two main abilities that are extremely common for bear players to have. First, we have Barkskin, which is a baseline ability for all Druid players, but bears gain a few additional amplifier nodes. At its core, Barkskin is a short 1-minute cooldown that provides the player a 20% damage reduction for 8 seconds. In the class tree though, there is the improved Barkskin node, which is a must pick, which extends Barkskin's duration by 50% all the way up to 12 seconds. Next, we have Matted Fur in the second tier of the class tree, which admittedly is pretty minor, but provides a small absorption shield whenever Barkskin is used. This just simply incentivizes using it before you take damage, not after. Shifting over to the Spec tree, there are more amplifier nodes here. First, Brambles is an extremely popular choice node and turns Brambles into a much more aggressive button, since this causes the Guardian Druid to radiate nature damage every 1 second while Barkskin is active, while also reflecting portion of the hits. In the second tier of the tree, we often see Guardian Druids opting in to take Survival of the Fittest in order to get to After the Wildfire node that I talked about earlier. This will move Barkskin from a 60-second cooldown down to a 42-second cooldown. Lastly, with the recent buffs to the Reinforced Fur talent option, Barkskin moves from a 20% to a 30% damage reduction cooldown. This gives the Guardian Druid way more uptime on Barkskin, which is the Guardian Druid's primary way to reduce a lot of their incoming damage consistently. Another ability that was reintroduced in Dragonflight is Rage of the Sleeper. This, like the baseline Barkskin, is a 1-minute cooldown, and it provides the bear with a 25% damage reduction with some perks. Those perks include a 15% damage amplifier paired with a 25% leech amplifier. Not to mention that you'll also reflect some of the damage you take back at your attackers. Any bear player that wants to always have a damage reduction cooldown active, rotating between Barkskin and Rage of the Sleeper is a great strategy. These also act quite nicely as damage amplifiers as well, so they should be used as often as possible by any Guardian Druid player looking to improve their overall damage. Guardian Druids have a plethora of major and minor cooldowns, which is definitely a nice change of pace from previous expansions. Incarnation is arguably one of the most insane tank cooldowns, not just for the Druid but out of all tanks. Well, at least until they nerfed Berserk Ravage. This video isn't meant to be a guide, so I'm not going to spend a long time going over every little detail of the Berserk nodes and Incarnation optimizations, but I'm going to go over the highlights. Incarnation is a buffed version of Berserk, meaning that it's going to last 15 seconds longer, increases your maximum health by 30%, and allows your mangle to cleave. It also pairs all 3 Berserk node powers together. Commonly, Persistence and Ravage is taken most by the Guardian Druid player base, which will reduce the cooldown of Mangle, Thrash, and Growl, and reduce the cost of Ironfur by 50% and Frenzied Regeneration cooldown by 100%. There is one Berserk node called Unchecked Aggression, which is a watered down version of the Shadowlands conduit, but nonetheless increases the Guardian Druid's haste by 15% and reduces Maul cost. Due to Tooth and Claw, it's rare for a Guardian Druid to actually cast Maul without a proc, but I digress. The real meat of Incarnation comes from the increased rage generation and the reduced cost of Ironfur, allowing the bear to reach armor cap much easier. With Frenzied Regen also having a reduced cooldown and paired with other talent choices, the bear is arguably unkillable, or at least can be left alone by the healer for the duration. Due to the capstone Ursoc's guidance, the Guardian Druid is going to be able to get some major cooldown reduction on the Incarnation cooldown, turning it from a 3-minute cooldown to roughly a 2-minute cooldown. I say roughly because it's purely dependent on how much rage the bear can spend and how fast. As a general rule of thumb, if you ever have a cooldown reduction in cooldown, you typically want to use that cooldown as often as possible. That remains true for Incarnation for the most part. In high keys, cooldowns might be slightly more scripted, and there is a nuance to holding cooldowns regardless of cooldown reduction, but for newer Guardian Druid players, you should be using Incarnation often. Finally, we have Survival Instincts. In Dragonflight, we saw a slight downgrade since we used to possess 2 charges of this. Many top builds opt out of the second charge, but since we are taking Survival of the Fittest, Survival Instincts is a slightly shorter cooldown, just over 2 minutes. It's hard to suggest when a Guardian Druid should be using this, but my suggestion is to use it to cover those windows where you don't have Incarnation active, nor Barkskin or Rage of the Sleeper. Remember that with Matted Fur, it also provides a small absorption shield, so you should feel encouraged to use it more preemptively. With major and minor cooldowns now covered, I want to quickly just talk about some nuanced damage reduction. Ever since the 10.0.5 rework, we've seen a lot of testing between Guardian Druid enthusiasts. Originally, Galactic Guardian playstyle was really common since your Moonfire provided passive damage reductions while the damage over time effect was active. We also saw some experimentation with a physical build through Ursoc's Fury and Raze, with many of the bugs being removed. Tooth and Claw procs accompanied with Raze is quite strong for mid-range keys. Essentially, the Guardian Druid's auto attacks have a chance to proc a free use of Maul, which will be replaced by Raze. Raze turns Maul into an AoE frontal, which will apply a 15% damage reduction to all mobs hit. The major problem with this build is the inconsistency in the proc rate, though I will say this build is really fun when paired with Ursoc's Fury, which during certain pulls will grant the Guardian Druid a massive capped absorption shield from this talent. Like I also mentioned, Guardian Druids often run Scintillating Moonlight, which makes mobs afflicted by your Moonfire deal 5% less damage to the tank per talent point spent. This is a 2-point node and grants access to Galactic Guardian, which allows the Guardian Druid to passively apply Moonfire to mobs. Those are the major ways that Guardian Druids can further reduce the damage they take without cooldowns, but they're way more nuanced. But that pretty much covers it. Guardian Druid is a pretty straightforward tank, with their mitigation being highly dependent on Ironfur paired with a little bit of self-healing and rotating CDs. Anyways, huge shout out to my Patreon supporters, because without them, well, there'd be much less of whatever this is. I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.